Let me see your identification, now.
I am Brigadier General Solomon Drayton, United States Army. What agency are you with, and do you have a warrant?
Uniform doesn't mean anything to me. We both know people dress up to look official.
This is my home. You are required to state your authority.
You fit the...
At 6:40 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in Fayetteville, North Carolina, Brigadier General Solomon Drayton stepped out of his front door in full Army Class A dress uniform. He was 54 years old, a 30-year decorated combat veteran, and the deputy commander of Fort Liberty's 18th Airborne Corps. The ribbons on his chest told a story most people would never fully understand. Bronze Star, Purple Heart, 3 overseas deployments, 2 combat commands, a career built on discipline, precision, and sacrifice. That morning, he was heading to a promotion ceremony on post, where he would pin a star on a fellow officer and friend. It was supposed to be a proud day. Inside the house, his wife, Dr. Nadine Drayton, a neurologist at Cape Fear Valley Medical Center, stood at the kitchen window with a coffee mug in her hand, watching him walk toward the car. Their 16-year-old daughter, Amara, was upstairs getting ready for school, backpack half-packed on her bed. The street was quiet. Sprinklers clicked across lawns. A neighbor's dog barked once and stopped. Then 3 black SUVs turned the corner in a tight formation, moved down the block without slowing, and came to a hard stop across the Drayton driveway. The engine stayed running. The doors opened all at once, and Solomon Drayton, a general officer in the United States Army, stood alone on his own front lawn, watching 8 federal agents step out in tactical gear with their hands already on their weapons. The team was led by ICE Supervisory Agent Victor Pollard, 43 years old, 16 years in federal law enforcement. Pollard had built a career on aggressive field operations and high-volume arrest numbers. Inside his agency, he was known for running his teams hard and fast, often in neighborhoods where the residents were Black or Latino. He had 11 prior complaints of excessive force and racial targeting in his personnel file. Every single one had been internally reviewed and cleared. His supervisors described him in evaluations as intense but effective. Officers who had worked under him used different words. His second that morning was Agent Craig Fenton, 36, 6 years on the job. Fenton had never once filed a dissenting report. He backed Pollard's calls without question, co-signed every use of force narrative, and stayed quiet when others raised concerns. He was the kind of agent who followed rather than thought, the kind whose silence made everything worse. Their team of 6 additional agents exited the SUVs in full tactical gear, ballistic vests, sidearms drawn, boots on a suburban sidewalk at sunrise. Not one of them had activated a body camera. Department policy required recording during all enforcement operations. Pollard's teams had failed to comply with that policy on more than 40 documented occasions, nearly all of them in communities of color. No one had ever been disciplined for it. That pattern would matter later. But in that moment, standing on a quiet residential street in front of a general's home, the cameras were dark, the weapons were out, and the agents were moving toward the driveway like they had already decided how this was going to end. Pollard reached the driveway first. He didn't introduce himself, didn't show credentials, didn't explain why 8 armed agents were standing on a private lawn at sunrise. He looked Drayton up and down, eyes passing over the ribbons, the rank insignia, the pressed uniform, and none of it registered as relevant. He spoke like a man who had done this 100 times before. "I need to see identification." Drayton's posture didn't shift. His voice was calm, measured, the tone of someone who had commanded thousands of soldiers under far worse pressure than this. "I'm Brigadier General Solomon Drayton, United States Army. This is my home. What agency are you with, and do you have a warrant?" Pollard ignored both questions. "Turn around." Drayton didn't move. He held eye contact. "Sir, I've asked you a direct question. Do you have a warrant?" Fenton stepped around to Drayton's left side, closing the space behind him without a word. 2 more agents fanned out across the lawn. Drayton stayed still. He could feel the positioning. He understood what it meant. Across the street, retired Marine Colonel Edwin Hargrove, 71, white, a combat veteran who had served 3 tours in Vietnam, stepped out onto his front porch in a bathrobe and slippers. He saw the SUVs, the tactical gear, the drawn weapons, and a man in army dress blues standing alone against all of it. He pulled out his phone and began recording. Upstairs in the Drayton home, Amara had moved to the window. She pressed her phone to the glass, hands trembling, and hit record. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The image spoke for itself. Her father, in full uniform, surrounded on his own property by men who hadn't even told him why they were there. Pollard finally offered something resembling an explanation, but only after Drayton asked a 3rd time. "We have an administrative warrant for an individual at this address." Drayton's expression didn't change. "What name is on the warrant?" Pollard glanced at a folded document in his hand. The name he read out loud did not belong to anyone in the Drayton household, had never belonged to anyone at that address. Drayton said so immediately. "That person does not live here. I've owned this home for 9 years. I can show you my military ID and the deed." He reached slowly toward his breast pocket. Pollard's hand moved to his sidearm. "Don't reach for anything." Drayton froze. "I'm reaching for my identification, that's all." Pollard shook his head. "We'll sort it out downtown. You're coming with us." Drayton's voice stayed level, but the edge was there now. "I am not going anywhere without a warrant bearing my name. That is my right." For a moment, no one moved. Then Pollard grabbed Drayton's right arm. Fenton seized the left. The motion was fast, coordinated, practiced. They drove him forward and down. A 1-star general in full-dress uniform hit the concrete of his own driveway, face first. The sound was a dull crack, followed by the scrape of metal on pavement as his metals dragged across the surface. His cap rolled off and came to rest in the grass. His chin split on impact. Blood spotted the concrete beneath his face. Drayton did not resist. He did not swing. He did not shout. He lay still with his arms pulled behind his back and said 5 words, loud enough for every camera and every neighbor now stepping outside to hear. "I am not resisting arrest." The front door slammed open. Nadine Drayton came down the steps barefoot, coffee mug abandoned somewhere behind her. She saw her husband face down on the driveway, 2 agents kneeling over him, blood on the concrete beneath his chin. She screamed his name. 2 agents stepped into her path before she reached the bottom step. Their bodies formed a wall on her own porch. Nadine's voice broke through the morning air, sharp enough to carry across the block. "That is my husband! Show me a warrant! Give me your badge numbers and your names right now!" The agent closest to her leaned in and lowered his voice. "Go back inside before this gets worse for your husband." The threat was quiet and deliberate, and Amara's phone caught every word from the upstairs window. The 16-year-old was sobbing, hands shaking so badly the footage would later show a constant tremor across the frame. But she didn't stop recording. She watched her father, a general who had led soldiers through combat, lying face down on his own driveway, with his dress uniform grinding into the pavement. Drayton heard his wife's voice. He heard the fear in it. He heard his daughter crying above him. And from the concrete, with blood running down his chin and both arms pinned behind his back, he spoke. "Nadine, Amara, stay calm. I'm okay. Do not come outside." His voice was steady, the voice of a man trained to lead under fire. But the cameras caught what his tone tried to hide: the blood on his face, the torn fabric at his shoulder, and the expression of a father who could not protect his family from the people standing on his own lawn. Colonel Edwin Hargrove crossed the street in his bathrobe with his phone held steady at chest height. He walked with the unhurried pace of a man who had spent decades in places far more dangerous than a suburban sidewalk. He stopped at the edge of the driveway and spoke clearly. "I'm Colonel Edwin Hargrove, United States Marine Corps, retired. I am recording this interaction. I want to know what authority you're operating under and whether you have a warrant for this man." Pollard didn't look up from where he knelt on Drayton's back. "Sir, step away or you'll be charged with obstruction." Hargrove didn't move, not 1 inch. That man is a brigadier general in the United States Army. He is a flag officer in the armed forces. You are making a career-ending mistake. Pollard looked up then. His expression was hard, dismissive. I don't care if he's the president. He fits the description. The words landed in the open air, where every phone microphone within 50 feet picked them up. Hargrove's recording captured Pollard's face as he said it, captured the knee still pressing into a general's back, captured the metals flat against the driveway. Down the block, doors were opening. A woman 2 houses east stood on her porch with her phone raised. A man walking his dog stopped at the corner filming. A teenager in a parked car had his window down and his camera pointed at the scene. Within minutes, there were 9 civilian recordings from 7 different angles, and every single one showed the same thing. A black man in full military dress uniform, pinned to his own property by armed agents who had no warrant with his name on it and no intention of letting him explain. Pollard stood Drayton up by the cuffs. The motion was rough, deliberate. Drayton's uniform was torn at the right shoulder where the fabric had caught against the concrete. The ribbons on his chest were scuffed. The bronze star sat crooked against the Purple Heart. Blood had dried along his jawline in a thin, dark line. Pollard walked him to the rear SUV and opened the back door. Drayton ducked his head and sat without a word. He didn't look back at his house. He didn't need to. He knew Nadine was watching. He knew Amara was still at the window. Fenton climbed into the passenger seat. The SUV pulled out of the driveway and turned east toward the federal processing facility across the city. Through the rear window, Drayton's ribbons were still visible, pinned to the chest of a man who had earned every one of them in places most of these agents would never see. On the front steps, Nadine stood with both hands shaking. The agents who had blocked her were walking back to the remaining vehicles. No one offered an explanation. No one left a card. She pulled out her phone and dialed Fort Liberty's Provost Marshal office. Then she called their attorney. Her voice cracked once on the second call, and then steadied. They just took my husband off our property in handcuffs. He's a brigadier general. They had no warrant with his name on it. The SUV was already 3 miles away. A general sat in the back seat behind tinted glass, and there was not a single piece of paperwork anywhere in that vehicle that justified his presence in it. The federal processing facility was a low, gray building with fluorescent lighting and the smell of disinfectant in every hallway. Drayton was walked through a side entrance, still in cuffs, still in his torn dress uniform. The intake officer looked at him, looked at the ribbons, looked at the rank on his shoulders, and said nothing. He was placed in a holding cell with a metal bench and a steel door. No phone call, no explanation of charges, no access to counsel. 3 hours passed. Drayton sat with his back straight and his hands folded, the same posture he held in briefing rooms and command meetings. He asked twice to contact his chain of command. Both times the request was ignored. The third time, a supervising agent passing the cell stopped and looked in through the narrow window. Drayton spoke clearly. I am Brigadier General Solomon Drayton, United States Army. I need to contact my command immediately. The agent smirked. Everyone in here says there's somebody. He kept walking. But somewhere in the building, protocol was finally catching up with what Pollard had set in motion. Drayton's fingerprints had been scanned at intake. His military ID had been entered into the system. The results came back in seconds. Active duty flag officer. Deputy Commander, 18th Airborne Corps. Top secret/SCI security clearance. No outstanding warrants, no criminal record. 30 years of service. The intake officer read the screen twice. Then he picked up the phone and called his supervisor. The supervisor came down the hall at a pace just short of running. He looked through the cell window at a man in a torn dress uniform sitting perfectly still on a metal bench. And for the first time since the SUVs had rolled up to that driveway, the room went quiet. Nadine's call reached the Fort Liberty Provost Marshal at 7:14 a.m. By 7:22, the 18th Airborne Corps Command Duty Officer had been notified. By 7:35, the Army's Office of the Staff Judge Advocate was on a secure line with the Corps Chief of Staff. The words were simple. One of our flag officers has been detained by federal agents at his home without a valid warrant. Within the hour, NCIS was looped in because of the joint service implications. The Pentagon's Office of General Counsel was alerted shortly after. A JAG colonel named David Sumner picked up his phone at Fort Liberty and dialed the ICE field office directly. His tone was not a request. "I'm calling on behalf of the 18th Airborne Corps regarding the unlawful detention of Brigadier General Solomon Drayton. You will release him immediately." The field office supervisor pulled up the arrest file while still on the line. What he found was what anyone who had looked from the beginning would have found. No valid warrant for Solomon Drayton. No matching name. No probable cause. The warrant listed a different individual who had never been associated with the Drayton household or that address. The supervisor asked how Drayton had been brought in. When told the details, he went silent. Then he asked if body cameras had been activated. No. Witnesses? Multiple. Was the general injured? Yes. He set the phone down, walked into his office, and closed the door. The panic that followed was quiet but absolute. Because every person in that building now understood that what had happened that morning was not a procedural error. It was a federal incident. Drayton was released at 10:47 a.m. No charges filed. No apology offered. He walked out in the same torn uniform he had been wearing when they put him on the ground 4 hours earlier. His chin was cut. His wrists carried deep red marks from the cuffs. His right shoulder was stiff where the joint had been wrenched during the takedown. A JAG officer, Major Constance Adler, was waiting in the parking lot. She drove him home without small talk. Drayton stared out the window with his hands resting on his knees, palms open, the way a man sits when he is holding something back. When the car turned onto his street, the scene had changed. Nadine was on the front lawn. Amara was beside her, eyes swollen. Colonel Hargrove stood near the driveway, phone still in his hand. 2 Army CID agents in plain clothes had arrived 20 minutes earlier and were documenting everything. Scuff marks on the concrete, a bloodstain near the front tire track, a service cap still lying in the grass where it had rolled that morning. Neighbors had gathered along the sidewalk. Some had been there since the SUVs left. Drayton stepped out of the car and Nadine crossed the lawn to meet him. She didn't say anything. She just held him. Amara followed. Inside the house, military attorneys were already reviewing 2 phone recordings. Amara's footage from the upstairs window showed the full confrontation from above. Hargrove's video captured it from street level with clear audio. And a neighbor's Ring doorbell camera had recorded the entire arrest from a third angle, wide and unbroken, including the moment Pollard looked up and said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "I don't care if he's the president. He fits the description." Within 48 hours, 3 parallel investigations were open and moving fast. The DHS Office of Inspector General launched a formal inquiry into the conduct of the agents involved. Army CID opened its own case focused on the unlawful seizure of a flag officer and the treatment of his family. And the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division assigned a team to assess whether federal civil rights laws had been violated. Pollard and Fenton's personnel files were pulled the same day. What investigators found was not a surprise to anyone who had worked alongside Pollard, but it was damning on paper. 11 prior complaints of excessive force and racial targeting. Every single one internally reviewed. Every single one cleared. Body camera logs confirmed that neither agent had activated their cameras the morning of the arrest. Department policy required activation for all enforcement operations. A deeper audit revealed that Pollard's teams had failed to activate cameras on more than 40 prior operations. Nearly all of them took place in Black or Latino neighborhoods. No disciplinary action had ever been taken. Then, the emails surfaced. Internal communications between Pollard and his direct supervisor showed a pattern of awareness at the leadership level. In one message flagged by investigators, the supervisor acknowledged the volume of complaints against Pollard's unit and described him in writing as aggressive but effective. That phrase would appear in federal court filings within the month. It would be quoted in headlines within the week. And it would become the single most cited piece of evidence that the agency had known exactly who Victor Pollard was and had chosen to look the other way. 3 days after the arrest, the videos went public. Amara Drayton, with her parents' permission, posted her recording from the upstairs window to social media. The footage was shaky and raw. It showed her father standing alone in dress uniform on his own driveway, surrounded by agents in tactical gear. It showed the moment Pollard and Fenton drove him face first into the concrete. It showed the metals scraping the pavement. It showed her mother blocked on the front steps by men who wouldn't give their names. Hargrove's footage followed hours later, filmed from street level with steady hands and clear audio. His video captured Pollard's voice without distortion. Every order, every refusal to show a warrant, every word. Then the family's attorney released the Ring doorbell footage from the neighbor's camera across the street. The angle was wide and unbroken, capturing the full scene from the moment the SUVs arrived to the moment they pulled away with a general in the back seat. Combined, the 3 recordings left no room for ambiguity. A decorated black officer in full military dress thrown to the ground in his own driveway by federal agents who had no warrant bearing his name, while his wife was physically blocked and his teenage daughter watched from a window. The videos reached 10 million views in 3 days. National media picked it up within 24 hours. By the end of the week, every major outlet had run the story. The Pentagon issued a rare public statement confirming the incident and calling it an unacceptable violation of a service member's rights and dignity. Inside the ICE field office, phones stopped ringing with routine calls and started ringing with requests from congressional offices, inspector general liaisons, and defense attorneys preparing for what everyone now understood was coming. The fallout inside ICE was swift and systematic. Pollard and Fenton were placed on unpaid suspension within 72 hours of the arrest. Their firearms were confiscated, their credentials deactivated, their access to federal systems revoked. 6 additional agents who had been on the driveway that morning were reassigned to administrative duties pending internal review. Pollard's direct supervisor, the man who had written aggressive but effective in an email he never expected anyone outside the agency to read, was placed on administrative leave. The ICE director issued an internal memo to every field office in the country. The language was blunt. What occurred in Fayetteville represents an institutional failure at every level. It was a failure of leadership, a failure of oversight, and a failure to uphold the standards this agency is sworn to maintain. The DHS secretary went further. In a public statement carried by every major network, he confirmed that the arrest of Brigadier General Solomon Drayton was unlawful, and that the department would cooperate fully with all ongoing investigations. Behind closed doors, the language was sharper. A senior DHS official told a room of agency attorneys that this was the worst single-incident civil rights exposure the department had faced in a decade. A federal grand jury was convened in the Eastern District of North Carolina. Prosecutors presented the video evidence, the personnel records, the complaint history, and the internal emails. They laid out a pattern that went beyond one morning on one driveway. Pollard's union representative attended the first day of proceedings and afterward called Pollard directly. His advice was short: retain private counsel immediately. This is beyond what we can protect you from. Pollard hung up the phone, and for the first time since that Tuesday morning, the weight of what he had done began to settle. The grand jury returned indictments within 2 weeks. Victor Pollard was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, under 18 U.S.C. 242, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. Craig Fenton was indicted as a co-conspirator for his direct role in the unlawful arrest and his years-long pattern of enabling Pollard's conduct without challenge. Their field supervisor was charged with failure to supervise and obstruction of justice for attempting to delay the release of internal complaint records in the days following the arrest. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. The jury watched all 3 videos in sequence: Amara's footage from the upstairs window, Hargrove's recording from the street, the Ring camera's wide, unbroken angle from across the driveway. They heard testimony from Drayton, who described the arrest with the same precision he brought to operational briefings. From Nadine, whose voice broke once when she described being told things would get worse for her husband if she didn't go inside. From Amara, who was asked what she saw from the window and answered, "I saw my father on the ground in his uniform, and I couldn't help him." From Colonel Hargrove, who told the court he had served in 3 wars and never seen an American service member treated that way on home soil. The jury reviewed the 11 prior complaints, the 40 operations without body cameras, the emails, the pattern. Deliberations lasted less than a day. Pollard was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. Fenton was convicted and sentenced to 3 years. The supervisor received 18 months. All 3 were permanently barred from federal law enforcement. Their names were entered into the National Decertification Index. No federal agency would ever employ them again. The Drayton family filed a federal civil rights lawsuit against ICE, DHS, and the individual agents. The complaint cited unlawful detention, excessive force, racial profiling, Fourth Amendment violations, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The video evidence, the testimony, and the internal records made the case impossible to defend. The government settled before trial for $4.2 million, plus sweeping mandated reforms. Mandatory body camera activation with termination-level penalties for noncompliance. Independent civilian oversight of all warrant execution operations. A verification protocol requiring confirmed name match before any detention. And quarterly public reporting on use of force demographics broken down by race, location, and outcome. Drayton returned to duty within weeks. He never publicly discussed the settlement. He never appeared on television. He went back to work the same way he had walked out of his front door that morning. In uniform, on time, posture straight, voice steady. Months later, he was promoted to Major General. In his first address after the ceremony, standing before a room of officers and officials at Fort Liberty, he said one thing that made the room go still. "I have led soldiers into combat zones where the rules of engagement were clearer than what those agents followed in my own driveway." No one spoke for several seconds. Across DHS, a training bulletin was distributed to every field office in the country. It included a still frame from Amara Drayton's phone video. The image showed a man in full Army dress uniform lying face down on residential concrete, his medals flat against the pavement, his hands behind his back. The caption read, "This is what happens when bias replaces procedure." No names were printed. They didn't need to be. The careers were already gone. This case was disturbing, but the one on the right ends in a way no one expects.